Welcome back to Haunted and Historic Australia for another episode in our Criminals, Cutthroats and Convicts series. In this episode, we take a look at William Bligh, the 4th Governor of New South Wales. Last week, we looked at his daughter, Mary, that girl, and the interesting life she led. We had a quick look at Bligh, but there was so much more to tell. We should start at William Bligh's beginnings, to how he ended up on his wild adventures. William Bligh was born on the 9th of September in 1754 in the southwest of England. We know that it was a port area, possibly around Plymouth, where he was christened, or Cornwall, where his ancestral manor, Tynton, was located. William was born to parents Francis Bligh, 33, a customs officer, and Jane Pearce, née Balsam, 41. Yes, 8 years his senior, and widowed. Wow, cougar. Jane had a child from a previous marriage named Catherine Pearce. No, not that one. Catherine Pearce was older than Bligh by 19 years. She may not have been in his life much, considering the age gap, but there also appears to be 2 other sisters, one a year older and one a year younger, between Francis and Jane. So it is no wonder that they signed him up for the Royal Navy when he was only 7 years old. This was actually quite common for kids residing in the port cities to do and have early experience on the sea, as many spent their lives on it. And his paternal grandfather, Richard Bligh, was a lieutenant in the Royal Navy, so it was William's destiny, even though it may not have been his father's. His sister Catherine married a John Bond, a naval surgeon, which would have helped William in getting selected. They were both aboard a HMS Monmouth, as well as the fact that it is believed his mother Jane knew the commander. But that was about the length of their connections. And William started his training, a 6-year stint that would be enough to see him ready to start a career in the Navy by age 13. Being so young, they also received schooling on board. However, a treaty with Paris meant that there was no more need for battleships, and the British fleet, which had once been large, was no longer required to be so grand. And the boys went back to land and regular school. It is believed William most likely worked with his father when not in school, picking up experience. He did well academically and also learned many skills aboard ships as a youngster. Sadly, when William was only 14, his mother Jane died, leaving his father to look after them. I am certain Catherine would have helped out too. Not long after this, his father remarries, which was usually done. And in 1770, William, now 16, sails aboard the HMS Hunter as a midshipman, still low on the food chain, but eager to climb, giving him much more experience out at sea. And at this time, there was a buzz around the discovery of New Holland, later to be called Australia. At 17, he was promoted to the HMS Crescent as a midshipman, assisting in the West Indies station, controlling slaves, and in Douglas on the Isle of Man as a customs officer, much like his father. It is believed here is where he met and fell in love with Elizabeth Betham, 18. She was older than William by a year, and that kind of ran in the family, older women. Despite his lieutenant grandfather, William did not have higher connections within the Navy, nor was the family overly wealthy. William had to rely on his talent and ambition, which saw him progress upwards faster than most other men his age. Joining HMS Ranger in 1774 was a smart move on Bligh's part, because it allowed him a greater chance of further advancement. However, he had to step back down to an able seaman first to gain the position on board. But within a year, he was promoted to midshipman, and with a master's mate title attached. With the position came an increase in salary and more responsibilities. In 1776, just 18 months later, he was promoted yet again for his talent and determination. An eager William Bligh had made his way onto Captain James Cook's crew aboard the HMS Resolution. Talk about goals! Captain Cook was the man, and to be aboard his ship and exploring was a life's achievement for a young able seaman. This would be similar to an apprenticeship for young Bligh. The HMS Resolution was being readied for Cook's third voyage of discovery into the Pacific, to find a new passage from the Pacific to the Atlantic around the Northern America. The southern voyage through Cape Horn and Good Hope was just too treacherous. There had to be another way. Well, that was William's job. But let's call him Bligh from now on. He is a man now, and it is also easier to refer to Captain Cook as Cook for the time being. Cook asked Bligh to navigate and plot courses for the voyage, as well as maintain instruments and maps used. He had to have his wits about him. More often than not, charts were inaccurate or non-existent, especially on Cook's voyages. Their route would take them up through the Arctic Circle. Cook had been impressed with Bligh's quick rise through the ranks and high recommendation from his mentors. Cook had also come from humble beginnings and a young entry into Navy. William Bligh in Plymouth and James Cook in Steers, North Yorkshire. They both had a love of the ocean. Now the Resolution had 112 crew, and it would be joined by ship Discovery, which had 70 crew, and Captain Charles Clerk. Resolution was prepared sloppy at Deptford Yard, and as a result leaked, as well as being hard to manoeuvre through tight rocky spots. There were a few near misses at the beginning of the journey. Bligh charted the journey well, which would be of great use for those who came through this passage later. First down to New Zealand and Tasmania, dropping off breeding animals to the indigenous people of Tasmania and the Maori people. On the journey north, it was found that the ship's rations had been stolen. Cook was furious and halved the ration daily food of each man on board. This also meant that they had to change course to Tongan Islands to pick up supplies, thus causing them longer time on the journey. Bligh charted islands on the maps that 12 years later would save his life, but we shall get to that later. Bligh and the crew noticed a change in Cook's behaviour on the journey, especially through the islands when stopping in. After learning some of the islander people were thieving from the ships, firing on the natives, cutting their ears off or beating them with the oars. Bligh, who admired Cook, was shocked at his gruesome display of anger. They eventually reached Tahiti for a 6-week stint gathering supplies. Cook's demeanour worsened. He was borderline mentally ill at this stage. Whether it was the stomach bug he endured too long, exhaustion as he was getting older now, and depression at being a long time at sea over the years, or anger at the constant thieving going on around him. His outbursts got worse, and he retaliated by burning the huts and canoes of the Tahitian people. They soon left, and the next area of land that they came across was named Christmas Island, as it was Christmas Eve, 1777, when they landed. Then next was the northern leg of the expedition, up through the North Pacific. They discovered a piece of land on their travels that Cook named Sandwich Islands, after the 4th Earl of Sandwich, John Montagu. The land was later named Hawaiian Islands. Like many of the islands that they came into contact with, the natives seemed to come out from the islands in canoes and welcome them. And the Sandwich Islands were no different. Cook went about befriending the inhabitants and doing quick repairs on the ships. He instructed Bligh to chart the islands. But before too long, they needed to be on their way. After 5 weeks, they set off to be the first British ship to travel and chart the north of the Americas. The Resolution was thrown about so badly on the trip that they were forced to stop somewhere and fix her, stopping at Nootka Sound, today known as Vancouver Island. Again they set sail north, this time navigating icebergs. It was as treacherous as the South Pacific, nearly being wrecked on rocks near the Unalaska Island. They made their way through Bering Strait and crossed the Arctic Circle, but were then met with a wall of ice 12 feet high. They could not find a way through. Cook decided that they'd have to go back, head back south, as it was now heading toward winter. But instead of riding the winter out closer to Bering Strait, Cook wanted to go back as far as the Sandwich Islands. Bligh had recommended Kealakekau Bay. Cook documented this in what would be his last journal entry. On the 16th of January 1779, Cook also mentions of thousands of natives in canoes coming out to both ships with items to barter. They were around Maui and then the larger island of Hawaii. Everything soured though when some of the natives took off with a boat's rudder, in which Cook fired over the canoe, saying, "As it was not intended for any shot to take effect, the sounding multitudes of natives seemed more surprised than frightened." They moved into the bay area as Bligh instructed, and over 2 weeks were making a move slowly north, leaving the bay area. It was believed by the crew that the natives thought that Cook was their god Lono after firing his musket, but became angered after Cook left their bay. A little further north, the Resolution took a blast from a storm and received damage to the foremast, which caused Cook to direct them back to the bay for repairs. But the natives were no longer pleased to see them, stealing further items from the Discovery. Cook, already ashore, who'd been checking in with repairs, was most angered by this, confronting the accused. The natives threw rocks, no longer believing him to be a god anymore. The Englishmen fired into the air, trying to frighten them. They retreated to their camp, as did the natives, and things became calm for the night. But come morning, it was realised that the Discovery's largest cutter, or boat, was stolen. Cook decided measures had to be taken and proceeded to blockade the bay. Bligh was instructed to take the remaining boats as it would be safer on the water. Bligh and some men loaded their muskets, as it seemed an attack would be imminent. Many Hawaiians launched canoes angrily toward Bligh, and as the men neared the shore, Bligh fired upon them, killing some of them. Cook decided he too should be back ashore to confront the king about why his people kept stealing. Cook went ashore and some men went to the hut where the king resided. But things did not go well. Although the king agreed to come aboard the ship and quieten his people, the king, following Cook back to the boat, caused some confusion with the natives, and they began a frenzy, stabbing and throwing spears at the Englishmen. The Englishmen were outnumbered, firing back upon the islanders as fast as they could reload their muskets, but sadly not fast enough. Most wounded from stabs and spear wounds. In the frenzy, Cook and the 4 men who escorted Cook to the king's hut were stabbed and dismembered as they fled the beach. Bligh and the other Marines who were on the shore defended themselves against thousands of natives witnessing the terrible ordeal. The natives dragged the bodies back into their camp, and the wounded scrambled to get back to the ships. From where they could see on the ships with telescope, they could see that the natives were dancing and completing a ritual ceremony for the burial of Captain Cook, cooking the remains and taking the flesh from bone. Captain Charles Clerke from the Discovery, who had become sick with tuberculosis on the journey, was given a wrapped parcel. Upon unwrapping this parcel, found pieces of Cook's charred body. This frightful image generated anger. Clerke assumed control of the voyage, having all Marines still aboard to go and force the natives back, recover the bodies or body parts, as well as the Resolution's mast and other pieces that they'd been working on, and get the hell out of Dodge. It took to the next morning to get all back onto the ship, as well as the dismembered men. Captain Charles Clerke, most upset but enraged about what had happened to Cook, vowed to finish his expedition, his third and final voyage. Captain Clerke decided that they were going to navigate the Sandwich Islands further, waiting out the remainder of winter, instructing Bligh to continue to chart and map the islands. Once this was finished, they set again north, after the winter had passed, of course, north to find the passage through to England, over the Arctic Circle. Well, it wasn't long before Captain Clerke succumbed to the tuberculosis. Clerke passed the baton over to Captain John Gore, who'd been an American-born British sailor who'd circumnavigated the globe 4 times and had been on all of Cook's voyages, including that founded Australia. But he also made Bligh a lieutenant, a position that William held close to his heart. He would be navigating for both ships now. Although John Gore was the captain, Bligh would be the one in charge of the route. The men were in good spirits, despite losing 2 captains. They took the North Passage right up to the ice wall once more, and was so upset that they could not pass it. Only 4,000 nautical miles through, they would have reached Britain, but instead had to turn around and take the long route back home. Returning home without Captain Cook, their beloved captain, who made it his life's work to navigate and explore new areas of the globe. His wife survived him another 50 years, Elizabeth Cook. As for Bligh, he was going to go and find an Elizabeth of his own. But we shall continue that next story. Yes, there has to be a part 2, because we need to delve a little bit more into Bligh's experience aboard the Bounty. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Hit the like button if you did, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And while you're there, click that notification bell so you're aware when we're posting part 2 of William Bligh's wild adventures.